Number 50, wide receiver slash weapon, Deebo Samuel for the 49ers. Number 49, Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver for the 49ers. Number 48, Javon Holland, safety for the Miami Dolphins. 47 is Frank Ragnow, center for the Detroit Lions. 46, tight end Mark Andrews from the Baltimore Ravens. 45, Demario Davis, linebacker from the New Orleans Saints. Number 44, offensive tackle Laramie Tunsil from the Houston Texans. 43, Derek Brown, defensive tackle from the Carolina Panthers. 42, cornerback Jalen Johnson from the Chicago Bears. And 41, rookie defensive tackle Jalen Carter from the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, last year rookie, sophomore, I guess, going into the season. All right, Trev, when do you want to start on this list of 10?
Yeah, so I figure we might do at some point in the show, like guys who didn't make the list that I would argue to make the list. Do you want to do that now, or do you want to leave that to the end?
We could do it now. I think so. The bottom of this list was honestly where the most kind of controversy was when I pitched it to the PFF staff and kind of asked for input. For the second year in a row, I think Deebo Samuel has come in at number 50. I struggle to know what to do with Deebo because he's not just a wide receiver.
Yeah.
And I think that leads to him getting kind of underrated now. Like, the difference he makes when he's on the field for the 49ers offense is crazy. He, I think, is one of the most impactful playmakers of any description. And because they just have so many mouths to feed, and this isn't just a Deebo thing, right. There's so many mouths to feed in San Francisco that I think all of those players almost get a little bit underrated. We have seen games where players are out and the offense has to run through George Kittle, and Kittle would be like, an unstoppable statistical monster if they only had George Kittle. Like if they had the Chiefs skill position players where it's just Travis Kelce and then other guys, Kittle's numbers would be insane, but they don't. They've got Kittle, they've got Deebo, they've got Ayuk, they've got McCaffrey, they've got all these other guys. So I think each one of them sort of suffers in overall perception because of that. And Deebo in particular, because he's that and the sort of wide receiver running back hybrid, I think people don't quite know what to do with that when kind of placing him in league-wide rankings.
He's tough. And, I thought an interesting part of this exercise is it's very easy to go, oh, this guy's too low. Like, this guy's way too low. And then you go, okay, find a spot for him. Like, move him up. Where are you moving him up to? Who are you putting below him, or who are you putting him above? And that part of the exercise is a lot tougher than seeing a guy at a certain rank going, oh, this guy's way too low. So I just wanted to say that right off the bat, because there's a handful of players that I was like, oh, this guy's way too low. But then actually going through the exercise of like, okay, where would you place him? It's a little bit more difficult. And I think that when you look at this, bottom 10 that you have here, 41 through 50, there's a couple of names. Jalen Carter, I think, is one that stands out where you go, okay, he was unbelievable in his rookie season. There's so many good NFL players, and there's a handful of guys who did not make the list who I would put in here over Carter at this point. But you mentioned in your little blurb, it's hard to keep him off because of just how dominant he was. Now, I think if we see a second dominant season from him here at a similar level, well, now all of a sudden we're talking about somebody who's probably going to be in the top 30, right? And there's probably no debate at all whatsoever. But there's a couple of guys that didn't make this list. Devontae Adams was a big one. Adams not making the top 50 was my biggest kind of like snub, if you will, of guys who didn't make the list. I think Tyron Smith actually should have still made the list. I really do. Last year he played in 13 games. He's been known to go through injuries and not be super available, but last year he played the most snaps in a single season since 2019, and his numbers were really good. His pass protection numbers were good. His run blocking numbers were really good. And obviously he is older. So like you said, kind of going into the season, what's your projection of him? But I think I still would have put Tyron Smith in here as long as he is healthy. I still think he's one of the top 50 players in the league. And then you get into a couple guys who, you can kind of debate one way or the other, but like Jair Alexander is another player who up and down position, but can be absolutely dominant when he's on. So those are a handful of the guys that I just wanted to mention that I had like right off of the list. Then you could throw in guys like Minka Fitzpatrick, maybe Mike Evans, a Teron Armstead, a Levante David. Like there's some other guys who are in consideration, but this is a tough exercise to cap at 50 because it feels like when you get to 40, there's like a bucket of 30 players, right? Yeah. That all could be in the back 10. So Carter was probably the one that I would have omitted. the most from this group that we had here in favor of some of those guys that I mentioned. Jalen Johnson, I think him at 42, for some people, it might sound rich, but you look into it and you correctly say this in the blurb. He looked like the best corner in football for a stretch there. So how do you leave that type of player off the list? I don't think you can. I think it's appropriate that he cracked the top 50. Derek Brown had a really good year on a terrible defense for the Panthers, so I understand him being at 43. You can make a case. Maybe he's not in the top 50, but he was just carrying that Panthers defense last year, so I get it. Tunsil at 44 is somebody who I think could even be higher, so I'm not going to take him off. Demario Davis, similar to Levante David, I think both of those guys are playing at an extremely high level. To me, you can kind of flip-flop them if you want, whoever's making the top 50, whoever's not. Davis has a little bit higher PFF grades. Davis has a little bit higher PFF grades than David, so it makes sense why you'd kind of put him at 45 and in this top 50. Andrews hurt last year, but really good throughout his career. You mentioned Frank Ragnow is about as good as it gets at the center position. Javon Holland, great call out, because Javon Holland, like Jalen Johnson, has had some elite play, man. He has had some really highly graded games. So I think it was an overall grade of above 90 this past season, right? So he played extremely well. Debo, I have no problem. Getting back to kind of your question and conversation about Debo, I have no problem with Debo, cracking a top 50. I think if you asked a lot of people around the NFL, is Debo a top 50 player? A lot of them would just tell you, yeah. There's so many different things he can do. And in this game, versatility is, I think, a lot tougher than what the best players make it look to be. Like, it's really tough to do one thing really well at the NFL level. Like, one thing. You're a slot receiver. You're a speed receiver. You're an outside receiver. You're a good pass blocker. You're a good pass rusher. You're just a good run defender. It's hard to do one of those things really well. Debo Samuel does a lot of things really well at an NFL level. So it would feel disingenuous to keep him out of a top 50. So I agree with you getting him back in there at the very least. But the player that I think I would say deserves the biggest bump on this list is Brandon Ayuk, for how well he played last season, wow, how efficient he was. Just the step that he took last season, to me, was unbelievable. I think you could move Brandon Ayuk into like almost top 30 range. At least like top 35, the way that he was able to play last year. I know it was kind of a one-year thing. We'll see what he does this upcoming year. It's going to be a big year for him. But what he was able to do and how efficient he was and how he won as a wide receiver, explosively, from a volume standpoint, reliability standpoint, you noted only 2 drops on over 100 targets. Like, to me, he put forth a year in 2023 that deserved to be even higher on this list. But that's my thoughts on those 10 guys.
Yeah, I love you calling out that, it's really easy to just say this guy should be up or down. You need to kind of look at the list and figure out, because when the top 50, they're all great players, right? When you're limiting it to that small a number, every single guy on this list is a fantastic NFL football player. To even make the list is an insane achievement. Like, Devontae Adams has a slight down year with a bad quarterback situation, and because of his age, you're kind of like, that's probably it for him. He's off the 50, right? Which is crazy harsh, but it get like those sort of older guys or guys with injuries, they almost give you an out. They give you an excuse to not have them on the 50. Like Tyron Smith, still fantastic when he's playing. The chances are he's not going to play every game. It's cover to get him off the 50 and put somebody else on there that probably will play the whole season. It's so hard to make this list. So, yeah, I think it's a really good point that, and Neil Hornsby, the founder of PFF, used to always make this point with like all-pro teams, right? All-pro team comes out, it's really easy to go, that guy shouldn't be on the list. This guy should be on. Like, this guy had an all-pro season. Like, okay, well, where does he go? Like, give me the guy you're taking off the all-pro list in order to get your guy on there, and then it's at least a fair exercise. I think Carter is an interesting one because, like, he was so good right out of the gate. And then even though he cooled down in the second half of the year, he was still really good. And when you're projecting him forward, it's like, it's tough because the one spot he probably isn't is 41 in the list, right? Like, he's probably either a top 20 player or he's not on the list. And 41 is just the kind of hedge where you put him in there because you had that incredible performance right out of the gate. The thing that astounds me about Carter is, okay, guys don't necessarily develop every single year in a nice linear fashion and just get better year on year on year.
Sure.
But nobody hit the ground running the way he did right out of the gate. Even Aaron Donald, J.J. Watt, like those guys, they were good right away, but they didn't start their career. Like Aaron Donald didn't start his career like Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald started his career like a normal defensive tackle, and then by year 2, he was Aaron Donald. And it's like, wow, now that guy's maybe the best defensive tackle we've ever seen. Jalen Carter started his career like Aaron Donald. Like, that's a crazy high bar to set. And okay, while he didn't necessarily sustain that over his entire rookie season, simply having achieved that over the first half of the season kind of suggests that the bar is crazy high for him.
I think that you put it a funny way, but a correct way. He's Jalen Carter's probably anything but 41. Again, it's hard to kind of argue with the numbers. I think for the spirit of what PFF is and why this company exists, it does make sense why a player like Carter would make a top 50, because even though right now I would conservatively like to say, hey, there are some guys that we have seen it from for multiple years who might be a little bit older, a Tyron Smith, a Jair Alexander, a Devontae Adams, who I think would be more worthy to put on this list as of right now. And you can keep Carter off of it for a year. Like I mentioned, if Carter has another year, even similarly to what we saw last year, you're probably putting him near the top 20 because he's that damn good. But the reason why PFF exists is sort of to point these things out, right? To be able to say like, hey, we have the data points, we have the grades, we have the performance evaluation to say, no. Like, we don't have to say, well, like, let's wait a second. Like, we are seeing it from him. So if he obviously takes a step back, then guess what? We're probably going to remove him off of the top 50 next year. So as an evaluator, again, like I would have leaned towards keeping him off the list and thinking a little bit more conservative, but I do understand why you put him on here, because again, that's the whole point of why we're doing what we're doing with grades, to basically say, hey, people might not believe that he has arrived yet. They might want to see more from him, and that's fine. But we're pointing out to you just how good he was last year. And I think you putting it the way that you did at least justifies his name being on this list as a conversation starter.